episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, as per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode, liked, commented and all that kind of stuff. Very, very much appreciated. Even got the tweet got a like off Angostura, so who knows, maybe, you never know. Anyway, today's episode of the show is, as you can see from the title page, features the distillery on Mull, Tobermory. Sharp intake of breath there. Yes, indeed, Tobermory, one of the founding members of the Axis of Evil. Yes, I know you guys love it when I do these episodes, but today's episode of the show, I think, is possibly the most interesting episode of the show I've ever done. And I've done some interesting episodes of the show over the years. I've tasted some really weird and wonderful stuff. I've tasted some incredibly old stuff, expensive stuff, rare stuff. But I think today's episode of the show could possibly top all of them, because I'm hoping it's going to prove a theory that I've been knocking around for a number of years. Anyway, I'll get to that point in due course. Let's look at Tobermory. Okay, so the perceived perception of Tobermory, not just from me, but from a lot of others, is that it really deserves its place in the Axis of Evil. On paper, it should be making quite an airy, coastal, island charactered spirit. It has a relatively moderate to long fermentation of the wort, 50 to 100 hours. The stills are moderately sized. They have fairly tall necks, boil balls, and have this bit of a kink in the lin arm. Feeds into shell and tube condensers. Distilled relatively slowly, one would presume, should produce a clean, lightish, with a bit of body kind of spirit. So why is it that the general perception of Tobermory is that, well, and Ledaig, its peated variant, tends to taste of wet cardboard and it is pretty rough and grim stuff often at the best of times. And I think that this can only be down to its cut points. Now, perceived wisdom generally means that you take your first cut at somewhere between 75 and 68 ABV. The whole idea of the first cut, obviously, is to run off the foreshorts, which tend to be heavy in aldehydes, higher alcohols, methanol, all those kind of unpleasant sort of notes that you really don't want in your spirit. Then you take the middle cut, and again, perceived wisdom is that the middle cut is taken somewhere between 65 and 55%. Now, obviously, if you're taking it closer to sort of 65 and upwards, you're eliminating the fusel oils. Now, of course, as we know with peated malts, a lot of the peated character, the phenolics, tend to come off towards the end of the run. So you are starting to dice with those kind of the amyl alcohol, the acids such as isoveric acid, that kind of thing, which is, yes, you're going to get your intense sort of phenolic character coming through, but you're also going to get the cardboard, the sweaty socks, the cheesy notes, and yes, okay, you can argue that by leaving it in the cask for long enough, the sulphurous, cheesy kind of compounds should theoretically be removed by the oak, but as we well know, and as from many years of tasting, that is not always the case. And sometimes you wonder, the spirit could be left in a cask forever and a day and it still probably wouldn't remove all of the impurities, or the unwanted impurities anyway. So I think that Tobermory, Ledaig's big issue has always been they've left the final cut too late. And I mean, they shouldn't need to do it on the unpeated spirit, because there's no phenolics to come through on the unpeated all right. So it might be very, very lightly peated, 1 or 2 parts per million, which is neither here nor there really. So yes, understandable why Ledaig could sometimes be a bit cardboardy and sort of fainty and cheesy and that kind of thing. But, and here's the but, and here's the sort of where we're starting. You're going to have to sort of work with me on this one. Over the last few years, I've been tasting independently bottled releases of both Tobermory and Ledaig that, shock horror, have been relatively clean. Now, why is that? And here, this is my theory. Now, obviously, I don't have any direct dealings with the distillery or the owners, so I couldn't get, wouldn't be able to get a comment on that. So I'm kind of working a bit blind. And again, this is my own personal theory. I believe that under the previous owners, Burns Stewart, somewhere between 2007 and 2009, I think the powers that be at Burns Stewart must have sort of taken note of a lot of the criticism levelled at the Tobermory Ledaig spirit, and I believe they adjusted the cut points, and I think they are taking a narrower, or started to take a narrower cut. Now, it's taken some time for me to get this kind of tasting together, and finally happened through a couple of sample swaps. And so what I have is a young bottling of both Ledaig and Tobermory that was distilled between those two dates, which I think goes to show what the current spirit is like. I have 2 miniatures of both Ledaig and Tobermory, which I was given by a good friend of mine, in 2016. I've done a bit of research, and I believe that both of these miniature bottles were bottled in 2014. Thus, again, we're looking at spirit that was distilled prior to 2007. So I think they were around about, because I think they're both 10 years old, so I'm going to hazard a guess that the spirit was distilled at somewhere around 2004 under the old regime, or under the old working practices. I've also got samples of the 2 current bottlings of both Ledaig and Tobermory, which I'm again going to hazard a guess that were probably bottled last year, maybe 2018 at the very latest. So we are looking at modern distillery bottled Ledaig and Tobermory from 2008 or 2007, or again between 2007 and 2009. So what I'm hoping is that basically I will taste the sort of the independent bottle first to sort of show what I think the spirit is at its current point. We'll look at an older distillery bottling and the current distillery bottling to see if that model and if that theory does indeed pan out. So, like I said, I think this is going to be a really, really intriguing episode of the show, and like I said, I'm hoping that it will indeed prove my theory correct. So, let's take a look at today's lineup. Okay, so obviously we're going to kick off with the Tobermory. We're going to start with a 9-year-old strictly limited Carn bottling. So this was from a bourbon barrel, probably 2 barrels I would imagine, as is the want with the strictly limited range. It was distilled in 2009 and bottled in 2018. Thus, like I said, 9 years old, and should hopefully give us the benchmark for the Tobermory portion of the tasting. Then we're going to look at the old bottling, the old 10-year-old Tobermory. So like I said, I think that this was spirit that was distilled in 2004, so should hopefully show the older style of Tobermory. And finally we're going to look at the current 12-year-old bottling of Tobermory, bottled at 46.3%, as is the older 10-year-old. Then we're going to move on to obviously Leche, and we're going to follow the same course again, but this time we're going to be looking at a 7-year-old Leche. This was bottled from a refilled bourbon barrel in the Douglas Laing Provenance range. It was distilled in August of 2008 and bottled in March of 2016. Cask number DL11090. So there you go, that should give us the benchmark of the Leche. The next bottling we'll be looking at is the miniature, again like I said, 10-year-old, so I'm guessing distilled somewhere around about 2004. And finally we'll be looking at the current 12-year-old, which again is bottled at 46.3%, and hopefully, like I said, this should either prove or disprove my theory, and well, kind of quite looking forward to this. So let's kick off with a bit of young Tobermory, and I say that without shuddering. Okay, so young modern Tobermory. Let's see what the nose gives us. Lightly oily, cereally, and clean. No faintiness, no cardboard, no cheese, no sweaty trainers, no horrible impurities. I mean, it's not majorly complex. I mean, it's pretty simple in actual fact. I mean, it literally is, you know, a little bit of off the still kind of note. There's a little bit of salt, there's some black pepper, and a little bit of marriness. But like I said, it's clean and it's barleyed, and it's what I would expect from Tobermory. Obviously there's not a huge coastal character, but then I don't think Tobermory has much in the way of warehousing space, so I think a lot of it is actually matured on the mainland, and that would kind of back up this this particular nose. So straight off the bat, spirit is now clean. Palate. Again, clean, crisp, fresh, nice citric end, a little bit of oak coming through on the mid palate, a little bit of vanilla, pretty straightforward again, barley focused, got a little bit of weight to it, a little bit of pepper, touch of salt. I mean, again, that is not an unpleasant bottling. I mean, it's not got a huge amount going on, but then again, it's only 9 years old, it's relative baby, but like I said, what it has got going for it is the fact that I'm not going cardboard, you know, it is pleasantly clean spirit. Okay, so now let's move on to the first of the two distillery bottlings. So this is the Tobermory 10-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oilier, more cereal, faintly industrial. There's a little bit of wet cardboard there in the background, a little bit of asparagus possibly. There's a little bit of an astringent sharpness. There's a bit more, maybe a bit more salt. There's a bit more, possibly a bit more weight. So like I said, this would kind of certainly lead me to believe that the cut has probably been taken a little bit later, possibly. Certainly, like I said, it's got a less clean feel to it. In actual fact, it's probably not one of the worst of the old-fashioned style of Tobermory bottlings I've ever come across. It is actually, yes, there is that slight cardboardy, slight faintiness in the spirit, but in actual fact, it's not too bad. I will say that although these bottles had been opened, I pretty much stuck them in a box when I was given them, because I mean, frankly, I wasn't exactly, you know, racing to taste them. And there they sat, and it was only when I was having a good box rummage I actually found them and thought, ooh, now, and yeah, this is not the worst Tobermory I have ever come across, it has to be said, but it does show an element of uncleanliness to it. Let's see what the pal's like. Well, that's got a bit of a rough finish. Yeah, that is more industrial, more cardboardy, more fainty. Again, I'm getting that slight sort of astringent asparagus, slightly grassiness. Again, it's weightier, it's fuller, but again, like I said, it has certainly got a lot more impurities in this, and it is quite rough. It's a bit short, it's a bit, you know, having you by the nads kind of thing, and it's certainly not this. It certainly is completely different to the first bottling, the Carn bottling, and perfectly goes to show, I think, the fact that they have indeed, they must have changed the cut points, because I can't believe that, you know, that there's anything else that could sort of like create this difference in character. So so let's move on to the 12-year-old now. This is where I'm hoping that this theory holds water with regards to the distillery releases, but this has actually been aged in both ex-bourbon, first fill bourbon, and virgin oak. I wonder whether we're actually going to find anything spirit-wise or not. No, is the honest answer. I mean, this is just oak overkill, and you know, that's what you do. If your spirit is a bit rough and a bit ready, chuck loads of something else at it, generally oak, generally sherry, but I mean, sawn wood, vanilla, toffee. I mean, I mean, I can't get any spirit character whatsoever, so I can't prove that the distillery bottling has indeed changed, because I can't find any spirit character whatsoever. All I'm getting is just, you know, a nose full of oak. I mean, all right, I will say that it is clean again. So, in essence, I'm guessing it is actually backing up my theory. There is no overt cardboardy faintiness, which, to be honest with you, no amount of oak is really going to cover up that kind of note. So I'm having to conclude that indeed I am indeed correct, that the cut points have been narrowed, the spirit is cleaner. Just why in God's name are you swamping it with oak now? I mean, this... Anyway, let's see what the pal's like. Oak, 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 oak. I mean, how does this say coastal? How does this say this is a spirit indicative of what we produce on Mull? It's not. It's a spirit that's been hammered by virgin oak and first fill American oak, toffee, vanilla, a little oak bitterness. I mean, like I said, again, I will say that the spirit feels clean. I'm not getting a dirtiness. I'm not getting an astringency. I'm certainly not getting any cardboardy notes. So from this portion of the tasting, it does seem to back up my theory of the narrowing of the cut points. So let's move on. Right, okay, So, as I said earlier, the primary reason for leaving your second cut later is obviously to maximise the amount of phenolic peat character that comes through. And Lecce, I believe, is moderately peated, 30 to 40 parts per million. So, and I've often found that it tends to have at best a really kind of pleasant smoked barbecuey kind of meaty kind of character. But when you sort of chuck in a bit of wet cardboard and cheese, it's all a bit Anyway, let's see what the Provenance bottling's like. Crisp, fresh, quite limey, slightly oily, some lovely sweet barley in actual fact, a little bit of manure. Again, there's a slight smoky bacon kind of note, a little bit more salt than I found on the Tobermory, a little bit more touch of violets possibly. I mean, that's actually not a bad bottling of young Lecce, it has to be said. Like I said, clean, fresh, emphasis on the slight meaty sort of peaty character. It's like, I can live with that, So we'll pass on. A little short, a little soapy maybe in the finish, but again, clean, fresh, citric, sooty, some nice sweet barley, a bit of drier peat notes. Don't get quite so much of the sort of the sort of smoky meaty character. And so again, this would seem to imply to me that the cut points have been narrowed. So not as much peat as possibly on the next bottling we'll be looking at. Maybe, I don't know. But cleaner, fresher, more pleasant spirit. Okay, so let's move on to the old Lecce. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end. Ooh, now that is quite a raw, ashy, meaty, astringent, slightly fainty. Again, this is probably not the worst bottling of Tobermory I've ever come across. It's not as cardboardy as some. There's a big, tarry, meaty sort of core to the nose. Yeah, really intense, a little rough around the edges, and I suppose you could sort of forgive it for that because of the fact that it has that peat intensity, and I suppose that the peat to a certain extent is almost kind of masking the slight sort of industrial cardboardy kind of character. But again, I would say it's probably not the most cardboardy Lecce that I've ever come across. I have come across a lot worse, it has to be said. So we'll pass on. Quite stringent, quite hot, quite bitter finish. It's a slight metallicness to it. Again, a touch of faints, a touch of cardboard, and a stringency, quite saltiness. Again, a little bit of oak, a little bit of smoked meat, tar. I mean, it's actually quite a complex palate, but there's that sort of jarring note there. It's kind of like if the spirit had been cleaner and more focused on maybe the barley and the peat rather than that sort of like industrial, sort of slightly cardboardy, slightly metallic edge, it would be a far more pleasant spirit. And again, like I said, this seems to indicate the fact that the cut was taken quite late, so quite a wide cut, and the oak just hasn't really quite removed all of that kind of character. Again, like I said, it's probably not the worst bottling of Leche I've ever come across in my life, but it's certainly not the best. Right, and finally, let's take a look at the current 10-year-old Leche, so 46.3. Let's see what those give us. Straight off the bat, less peat, possibly a bit more oak, and I'm almost getting some estery fruit, some heather, apricot. It's rounded, it's clean, it's less lean, less hot, less metallic, more toffee. So yeah, okay, I'm getting the sort of like the feeling that they've chucked in more first fill bourbon again, to sort of just to make sure. It's kind of like almost going overkill, isn't it? It's kind of, yep, okay, we'll reduce the cut points, we'll make sure the spirit is really clean, we'll shove it into loads of active oak casks, and damn, you're not going to get any of this kind of nastiness at all. It's kind of almost going from one extreme to another to a certain extent. But again, I think it does actually prove my point that the spirit is a lot cleaner, and just there's no need for all that bloody oak now. If you dial down or reduce the cut points, so you're reducing the sort of like unpleasant cheesiness to your spirit. Let that show. Use more refill casks rather than first fill. Because it is again very, very different, and I don't know whether I mean, yes, this is obviously a cleaner spirit, so is it better? I think it has less intrinsic spirit character, but it's cleaner, and that to me is what I'm looking for here. So a pass one. Again, cleaner, less peated, slightly ashier possibly, some fruit, some barley, apricot, again a lot of oak, a lot of vanilla, certainly on the mid palate, a little bitterness on the finish. Obviously we know this is not coloured, it's not chill filtered. There's a little meatiness on the finish, on the aftertaste, a little coastal note as well. Again, the spirit is cleaner, it's possibly less interesting because of the use of too much oak, but I think in this instance it certainly, I keep saying that, but it does actually prove my theory, well, as far as I can see, my theory is correct, because the spirit, although a little bit more masked, does seem to appear to be cleaner, and at the end of the day, that's what you want. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Well, like I said, I think this has been a really interesting episode because it has proven to me, anyway, whether this is true or not, whether I can, the distillery will turn around and say, no, you're talking bollocks. I have absolutely no idea, but to me it proves my theory correct, that the distillery have indeed at some point between 2007 and 2009 adjusted their cut points and now are producing a cleaner, less industrial, less raw, less fainty spirit. Now, of course, the question you're going to ask is, does that mean that this warrants the distillery doing a Thule? And of course, obviously doing a Thule means being promoted out of the axis of evil. And, well, that is a very good question, and I will probably ponder that and in due course, and I will think about it. But the trouble is with doing a Thule, there has to be a damn good reason. And yes, okay, you can argue now that the spirit that the distillery is producing is a lot cleaner than what it was, but it has history, you know, and I don't know. Maybe in a few years, I don't honestly know. Like I said, I'd have to give it some real serious thought before I actually promoted Tobermory out of the axis of evil. But anyway, let's kind of look at the individual bottlings. So the Carn Tobermory, like I said, that was kind of like. I wouldn't say that it was this particular bottling. It was like I said, I've tasted several other young Tobermorys, and this was the one I could actually find to kind of illustrate the point. But it does seem to, like I said, it backs up my point about the fact that the distillery is now producing a cleaner spirit, which to me can only mean the cut points have been narrowed. The old Tobermory 10-year-old, well, like I said, I think that kind of summed up the old-fashioned style of the spirit produced at the distillery. Not the worst bottling of Tobermory I've ever come across in my life, but it did showcase the fact that it had that roughness to it. The current bottling of Tobermory, like I said, if you've gone to all the bloody trouble of changing a cut points, admittedly the ownership of the distillery has obviously changed since the time that this was distilled, but even so, you know, you've obviously, I mean, maybe they've now got this legacy of no end of bloody virgin open first fill bourbon matured spirit that they've got to do something with it, you know, and this is always the point, isn't it? You know, when you buy a distillery, you basically got to deal with whatever the previous owner was doing, you know, because it's got to come through the system at some point. So personally, like I said, it proves the point that the spirit is cleaner, but it is just dreadful bottling, really, for a different reason. You know, you can't win, can you? So the Provenance Leche, like the Carn Tobermory, certainly proved my point that the spirit is now cleaner and, you know, a lot more pleasant in actual fact. And the old Leche 10-year-old, certainly like the Tobermory, to me, proved my point. And you could argue that the new Leche 10-year-old certainly proves the point. Again, you know, too much oak. No, I did kind of live with that, I suppose, because the spirit is cleaner, there's less peat, so again, it all seems to suggest that the cut points have been narrowed, and I would guess it is more to do with the final cut point, taken less towards 55% and probably closer to sort of 65%, and, you know, so there you have it. You know, this is my pronouncement on what is going on at Tobermory. And like I said, you know, the powers that be may well turn around and say that I'm talking absolute rubbish and nothing at all has changed. But I wouldn't believe them at all if they said that, because the evidence in front of my own eyes seems to suggest otherwise. So there you go. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you really enjoyed it, because to me, like I said, it's been one of the most interesting episodes of the show that I think I've ever done, and I always feel good when I've proven a point, you know, well, there you go. Next week we'll be back to something more. God only knows what we'll be doing next week. Anyway, but for this week, all I can say is good afternoon and good dramming.